A couple of months ago, my family used to rent cottages by a serene lake along with my grandparents almost every spring. We'd typically have barbecues, go swimming, and enjoy boat rides on the lake for fishing and other exciting activities. Over time, this place became my favorite escape from the hustle and bustle of the city. When we first arrived at the cottage, I have to admit, it appeared rather dubious at first glance. The neighbors quickly vacated the pool area as soon as we arrived, and they stared at us for a while. Fast forward to the second evening, my sister and I both had trouble sleeping, so we decided to sneak out and sit by a nearby pond to chat. Little did I know, my sister had taken some sleeping pills and seemed to doze off about 20 minutes later while playing on her phone. Being the curious teenager that I was, I discreetly borrowed her phone and decided to go for a walk. I found a cozy spot by a tree overlooking the lake. I sat there, contemplating life and admiring the moonlit night. But soon, I started hearing an eerie noise emanating from the opposite side of the pond. I turned my attention towards that direction, and I thought I saw some movement. However, it was challenging to discern much detail because I had a bit of a buzz, and the pond's distance made it harder to see. After staring in that direction for a few minutes, I spotted a shadowy figure emerging from the darkness. My heart raced. It was a tall individual wearing a hood, all dressed in black, standing at a staggering height of about 6 feet and 6 inches. I glanced down and noticed that he was holding a shovel. I froze. That's when I realized he was gazing directly at me. Then, to my disbelief, he started sprinting towards me. Panic surged through me, and I made a run for it back to the cottage. He was swiftly circling the pond's perimeter, but luckily, I was closer to the cottage area. I reached the driveway and concealed myself behind my family's car. I observed the man about 20 yards away, frantically searching for me. When he turned his back and disappeared behind a nearby building, I seized the opportunity, quietly slipping back inside the cottage and securing all the doors. I crawled into bed, trying to convince myself that it was just my imagination. The rest of the trip unfolded without any further disturbances, but I couldn't shake off that unnerving encounter. I kept wondering what he was up to with that shovel, and what could have prompted his sudden pursuit. I couldn't help but speculate that I might have stumbled upon him burying something. I'll never have definitive answers, but one thing is certain. I hope I never cross paths with that eerie, towering figure in the woods again. Embark on a chilling journey like no other by subscribing to my channel. Join me as we explore the darkest depths of suspense, mystery, and thrills. Get ready for heart-pounding adventures, spine-tingling tales, and a constant adrenaline rush. Subscribe now and dare to delve into the unknown with us. A few years ago, he passed away, leaving me ownership of his cabin, which he had constructed in the 70s. Although he never resided there permanently, he and my grandmother would frequently take short trips to the cabin, staying for a few days at a time. When I discovered that I had inherited the cabin in his will, it filled me with both excitement and sadness. My grandparents used to look after me for extended periods, because my parents had jobs that demanded frequent travel. During those times, I would always request to visit the cabin, so we spent a significant amount of time there whenever my parents were away. Currently, I'm enrolled in a college out of state, and when I received ownership of the cabin, I had just started my first semester. This meant I couldn't move my belongings in until the following spring. When the time finally arrived, I made the trip back to my hometown, retrieved the cabin keys from my parents, and began the process of settling in. The drive to the cabin was a journey down memory lane, and I felt immensely grateful and happy that this cabin would become my first real home. Nestled in the woods, it was only a 10-minute drive from the nearest city, so it wasn't as remote as one might imagine. Upon arrival, I immediately started planning how to restore its former charm. The lawn was overgrown, trees and branches had fallen, and weeds sprouted from every crack in the driveway. I decided to postpone the outdoor work until the next day, and spent that evening unpacking. Walking through the rooms filled me with nostalgia, as I hadn't visited in nearly a decade. To my surprise, the room I used to sleep in appeared exactly as I remembered it. My collection of model cars was still there, along with various toys and board games neatly arranged on the shelves. I sat there lost in reverie for a while before snapping back to reality and returning to my car. With only a few bags to carry inside, I finished the task quickly. The rest of the night was devoted to vacuuming and dusting the interior, as it was desperately needed. By the time I finished, I was thoroughly exhausted. I decided to step outside and sit on the porch's glider bench for a while. The cabin featured a wraparound porch that extended around roughly half of its exterior. The bench faced the driveway, with a small lake just 100 feet ahead, surrounded by woods. The moonlight didn't illuminate the yard much, creating a peaceful and secluded atmosphere. During visits with my grandparents, I would occasionally go kayaking with my grandpa on the lake. He had constructed a small dock in front of the lake, making it easier for us to access the water since the ground was usually marshy. While gazing at the lake, I noticed something in my peripheral vision that made me do a double take. I saw a figure approaching the dock from the opposite side. I watched with curiosity, trying to discern why someone would be out there so late. My best guess was that it was a neighbor taking a nighttime stroll or a late-night angler. I continued observing as the figure reached the dock and sat on its edge. It didn't alarm me because the cabin had been uninhabited for quite some time, and the neighbors probably weren't aware of my recent move-in. I decided to turn off the lights inside the cabin, which were shining through the lake-facing windows, to avoid any awkward interactions with the visitor. After a few minutes, I peeked out the window, but the person had vanished. Realizing I had forgotten to bring curtains for my room, and not having any window coverings throughout the house, I frantically searched for anything that could block the light. I found a box of white garbage bags under the kitchen sink but continued looking for something more suitable. Eventually, I settled on using a blanket and went into my grandparents' room to retrieve one from their old bed. As I pulled off the first blanket, I noticed something odd. The sheets on the bed were strangely wrinkled from top to bottom in the center, as if someone had been lying there. The last people to use that bed were my grandparents, so I dismissed it as their doing, though it still struck me as peculiar. I soon forgot about it and fell asleep, only to be awakened by a loud noise. My eyes snapped open, and I wondered what could have caused such a disturbance. I decided to investigate, hoping that something had merely fallen over in the house. The sound seemed to come from the front of the cabin, so I silently made my way down the hallway to the front door, checking for any signs of unusual activity. The night outside was pitch black, making it impossible to see anything through the window. I turned on the interior lights to get a better view of the area outside, but found everything to be as it had been before. Concerned, I retrieved my grandpa's shotgun from their room and stepped outside. With the exterior lights of the cabin out of order, I had to rely on my phone's flashlight. As I opened the door, I carefully scanned the area to my left and right while stepping onto the wraparound porch. Once again, nothing seemed amiss until I stumbled upon a basketball-sized hole in the porch that certainly hadn't been there before. I tensed up as I approached it. Much of the wood was rotted, and it was in dire need of repair, so I assumed that an animal had fallen through. I aimed my flashlight into the hole and saw something I couldn't have anticipated. A few feet below the deck, on the ground, lay a large black boot. I reached down to pick it up, knowing that both the hole and the boot had not been there earlier. The boot was soaked and caked with mud, and it lacked shoelaces, explaining why it had fallen off. However, that was the least of my concerns. The realization that someone had been lurking around my house in the middle of the night sent me into panic mode. I rushed back into the cabin, locked the door, and immediately called the police. While waiting for them to arrive, I sat by the window, constantly glancing out toward the front. Although everything remained shrouded in darkness, I could vaguely make out the dock by the lake. Just when I began to feel some relief because the police were only minutes away, I undeniably spotted the figure of a person walking by the dock as I peered out the window. I reached for the shotgun beside me on the floor, making sure it was loaded in case I needed it. When I looked out again, the person had vanished, and I never saw them again. The police arrived shortly afterward, conducted a thorough search of the cabin, and then did a quick scan of the surroundings. But to their surprise, they found no trace of the mysterious figure, and there were no footprints leading away from the hole in the porch. It was as if the intruder had disappeared into thin air. The officers assured me they would patrol the area regularly, and they left me with their contact information in case I experienced any more disturbances. Over the next few weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I kept the shotgun close at hand and installed security cameras around the cabin. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't uncover the mystery of the figure by the lake or the strange boot beneath the porch. The cabin, once a source of happy memories, had become a place of... I was thrilled to finally take a break from the bustling city and head to a quaint cabin nestled deep in the mountains. I had heard great things about the place, and I couldn't wait to spend the weekend in this quiet, secluded place. My companions and I had booked the cabin for the weekend and were determined to make the most of it. We arrived late in the evening after a long flight. The cabin was surrounded by dense forests and was completely cut off from civilization. We were expecting some much-needed serenity. As night fell, unusual events began to occur. We heard strange noises outside, as if something was tapping on the windows. We dismissed it as wildlife and headed to bed, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. The next morning, we woke up to discover strange marks on the windows. They looked like claw marks, as if something had tried to get in. We all felt a bit uncomfortable, but decided to embark on a trip to clear our minds. During our trip, we stumbled upon an abandoned cabin. It had clearly been abandoned for many years. We decided to venture inside, but as soon as we entered, we were overcome by a strange cold. The cabin was dusty and damp, yet there was an indefinable feeling of unease about it. We hurriedly exited the cabin and resumed our journey. During our journey, we noticed that the forest around us seemed to become darker and more dangerous. The more we ventured, the more certain we became that something was following us. We could hear rustling in the bushes and branches snapping, as if something was casting a shadow over our every step. We tried to ignore it and focus on our journey, but the feeling of being watched became increasingly stronger. When we returned to our cabin, we locked all the doors, but the strange noises continued. We could hear something scratching at the windows and doors trying to get in. We were terrified, but unsure of what to do. We decided to huddle together in one room and leave the lights on for the rest of the night, but sleep was out of the question. The rest of the night was a blur. Strange sounds came from outside the cabin, as if something was moving and rubbing against the walls. We could hear it all getting closer and closer until it finally stopped. When morning arrived, we hurriedly packed our bags and left without stopping for breakfast. None of us dared to stay longer. As we were about to leave, we noticed footprints outside the cabin, unlike any we'd ever seen. They had a humanoid shape, but each toe had an unusually long claw. We understood that we had to evacuate the building as quickly as possible. We never spoke of that night again, but we all shared the knowledge that something was lurking there, something we desperately hoped to avoid encountering again. We returned to town and never returned to the cabin, and I could never shake the terrifying feeling that I was being stalked, tracked, and watched. Memories of that cabin still haunt me to this day.